While you were scrolling through your social media feed and watching the stock market go up and down, something far more dangerous just happened in Beijing, and almost nobody's paying attention. On January 1st, 2026, China flipped a switch on the global silver supply chain. Not a metaphorical switch, an actual regulatory switch that now controls whether your iPhone gets made, whether Tesla can build batteries, and whether the United States military can manufacture its next generation of missiles. They didn't fire a shot. They didn't impose sanctions. They simply published a list of 44 companies. And if your name isn't on that list, you cannot export silver out of China. Period. Let me show you exactly what this means and why the next 90 days will determine whether America remains an industrial superpower or becomes entirely dependent on Beijing's permission slip to build anything. According to Reuters and CNBC, reporting on December 30th, 2025, China's Ministry of Commerce published new regulations requiring all silver exporters to obtain government licenses. These rules, which took effect on January 1st, 2026, are not temporary. They run through 2027. That's 2 full years of China deciding who gets silver and who doesn't. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so China wants some paperwork for exports. So what? This isn't paperwork. This is weaponization. China controls between 60 and 70% of the global silver supply chain, according to multiple industry analyses and confirmed by precious metals research. This isn't just about mining the silver. China dominates the refining, the processing, the logistics. Even silver that gets mined in Mexico or Peru often passes through Chinese refineries before it reaches American factories. And now Beijing has the legal authority to turn off that flow whenever they want. Let's talk numbers, because numbers don't lie. According to the United States Geological Survey, USGS, data published in 2025, America produces approximately 100 tons of silver per year. That sounds like a lot until you realize that the United States consumes far more than it produces. We are a net importer. The same USGS report shows that we import 44% of our silver from Mexico and 17% from Canada. But here's the problem. A massive portion of that Mexican and Canadian silver gets shipped to China for refining before it ever reaches an American factory. So even when the silver comes from our neighbors, it passes through Chinese hands, and China just put those hands around our throat. Why would they do this? Because 2 months ago, something happened that scared Beijing. In November 2024, the United States government officially added silver to its list of critical minerals. This was announced by the US Geological Survey and reported across financial media. A critical mineral designation means the US government has recognized that silver is essential to national security and economic stability. It means without a reliable supply of silver, the United States cannot manufacture the technology it needs for defense, infrastructure, and industry. The Pentagon doesn't hand out that designation lightly. They did it because they know we have a problem, a supply problem. Silver isn't just shiny metal for coins and jewelry. According to industry data, every Tomahawk cruise missile the U.S. military fires contains silver. Every F-35 fighter jet has silver components. Every advanced radar system relies on silver's electrical conductivity. When the Pentagon says silver is critical, they mean without it, the entire defense industrial base grinds to a halt. And Beijing knows this. China watched the United States designate silver as a critical mineral, and they made a calculation. If silver is that important to America, then controlling silver gives us leverage, and they were absolutely right. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Elon Musk saw this coming. On January the 2nd, 2026, just 1 day after China's export controls took effect, Musk posted on X, formerly Twitter, quote, "This is not good. Silver is needed in many industrial processes." That post was reported by Fox Business, and it sent a ripple through the markets. Because Musk knows something most people don't. Tesla's entire business model depends on silver. Every electric vehicle battery, every solar panel, every power system they manufacture requires silver for electrical contacts and conductivity. If China restricts silver exports to the United States, Tesla's gigafactories in Texas and Nevada become billion-dollar warehouses full of incomplete products. But it's not just Tesla. Apple needs silver. Samsung needs silver. Every electronics manufacturer on Earth needs silver for circuit boards, contacts, and switches. And China just positioned itself to decide who gets access and at what price. Now let's talk about what happened to the price. Because something absolutely unprecedented occurred in 2025. Silver went from around $24 per ounce at the start of 2024 to a record-breaking $80 per ounce in late December 2025. That's more than a 230% increase in less than 2 years. This was reported by CNBC, Reuters, Bloomberg. Every major financial outlet covered this. The price is currently sitting around $73 per ounce as of early January 2026. That's still triple what it was 2 years ago. And according to multiple analysts cited by industry publications, if China fully implements these restrictions and global supply tightens further, prices could push to $100 per ounce or higher. Think about what that means. Every solar panel gets more expensive. Every smartphone gets more expensive. Every electric vehicle gets more expensive. This isn't just a precious metals story. This is an inflation story that's about to hit every single consumer product that contains electronics. But here's what should really terrify you. This isn't new for China. They've run this exact playbook before. In the 1990s and early 2000s, China systematically cornered the rare earth elements market. Rare earths are materials critical for everything from smartphone screens to missile guidance systems. China used a simple strategy. They lowered prices to bankrupt Western mines. Then they bought the distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. Today, according to US Geological Survey data, China controls over 90% of the global rare earth supply. They can shut down production of F-35 fighter jets with a phone call. They can cripple the entire electronics industry if they want. And the West has zero leverage because we sold them our mines when prices were low. Now they're applying the exact same strategy to silver, and it's working. Look at what's happening in Mexico. Mexico is the world's largest silver producer, churning out 6,400 metric tons in 2023, according to USGS data. That's 23% of global production. The states of Zacatecas, Durango, and Chihuahua account for 80% of Mexico's silver output. But over the past 24 months, we've seen a quiet shift. Chinese state-owned enterprises have been increasing their presence in Mexican mining through joint ventures, technology partnerships, and offtake agreements. An offtake agreement is a contract that guarantees 100% of a mine's future production goes to a specific buyer. So even if the mine is physically located in Mexico, the silver never reaches the US border. It goes straight to a port and onto a ship bound for Shanghai. The Monroe Doctrine, the idea that the Americas are the US sphere of influence, is dead. China has moved into our backyard, and they brought their checkbook. Peru is the world's second largest silver producer, with 3,100 metric tons produced in 2024, according to industry data. But Peru has been experiencing political instability and social unrest. Mining operations have been disrupted. And amidst the chaos, who's been buying up distressed mining assets at discount prices? Chinese companies. They're playing the long game. They know that eventually the political dust will settle, and when it does, they'll own the copper and silver that the world needs for the green energy transition. Where's the media coverage? Where's the outrage on CNN or Fox News? This story is too complex for a 30-second soundbite. But this is the story that actually matters. While we argue about politics and culture wars, the ownership of the physical world is changing hands. The West is becoming a service economy with no resources. The East is becoming the resource superpower. And here's the kicker. This is another nail in the coffin of the US dollar's global dominance. If China owns the mines and controls the refineries, they can demand payment in yuan instead of dollars. This forces countries to hold Chinese currency reserves, which weakens demand for the dollar. We're moving toward a resource-backed currency system. And the United States has sold its resources. Let me connect another dot for you. The current US administration has big plans for a green energy transition. Solar panels on every roof, electric vehicles in every driveway. That's the goal. But solar panels require massive amounts of silver. According to industry estimates, a single solar panel uses approximately 20 grams of silver. If America wants to deploy solar at scale, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of tons of silver needed over the next decade. By allowing China to control the silver supply chain, the US government has made its own energy policy impossible to achieve without Beijing's permission. We will be dependent on China for our green energy future, just as Europe became dependent on Russia for natural gas. This is a strategic blunder of historic proportions. And it gets worse. It's not just the mines, it's the smelters and refineries. China processes a huge percentage of the world's metal ores. Even if a mine is owned by a Western company, the raw ore often gets shipped to China for refining because environmental regulations have shut down smelters in the United States and Europe. This means China controls the choke point of the supply chain. They can turn off the tap of refined silver whenever they want, and we have no backup plan. Let me give you some historical context, because history has a way of repeating itself. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941 because of an oil embargo. Germany invaded Russia in World War II partly to secure oil fields and agricultural land. Throughout history, when nations run out of critical resources, tensions escalate. And sometimes those tensions turn into conflicts. As silver becomes scarcer and more strategically important, we're entering an era of resource competition. The battlefields of the future might not be over ideology. They'll be over mines, refineries, and supply chains. For the individual investor watching this, here's what this confirms. The supply of available silver is being locked up. The free float, the amount of silver available on the open market for purchase, is shrinking. When China buys mines or implements export controls, that silver is effectively removed from the public market. Scarcity drives price. If you hold physical silver, you're holding a piece of an asset that superpowers are fighting over. That has value. Real, tangible value in a world where paper promises are becoming increasingly questionable. Now, many Americans believe the U.S. government has a strategic stockpile of silver, just like we have oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We don't. According to U.S. Treasury data, the United States sold off its strategic silver reserves decades ago. We have zero national buffer. If a conflict breaks out tomorrow and we need silver for defense manufacturing, we would have to go into the open market and compete with China to buy it. That lack of preparedness is, in my opinion, criminal negligence. This isn't some distant future scenario. This is happening right now. The export controls took effect on January 1st, 2026. The deals are being signed, the regulations are being enforced, the ships are sailing. By the time the mainstream public realizes that made in China applies not just to finished products, but to the raw materials needed to make everything, it will be too late to do anything about it. Let me show you what's happening on our northern border, because it's not just about South America. Canada, our NATO ally and closest trading partner, has allowed Chinese state-owned companies to acquire significant stakes in its mining sector. Despite warnings from intelligence agencies within the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, these deals have been approved under the label of foreign investment. Silver that was supposed to flow south to American industries is now flowing west across the Pacific Ocean to Chinese ports. The Five Eyes Alliance, which includes the US, Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, is supposed to be sharing intelligence and protecting each other's strategic interests. Yet we're blind to the economic warfare happening on our own soil. We're losing our closest allies' resources to our greatest adversary. We've seen this playbook before. In the 1990s, China used predatory pricing to bankrupt Western rare earth mines. They sold rare earths below production cost until all the Western competitors went out of business. Then they bought the assets cheap. Today, they control over 90% of that market. They're now applying this same monopoly strategy to silver. They don't need 90% control to break the system. Even 40 to 50% control of the silver market gives them massive leverage over the entire global economy. We are walking into the same trap twice, and somehow nobody in Washington seems to care. Why don't mining companies fight back? Because they're starved of capital. The suppressed paper price of silver, which has been manipulated on exchanges like COMEX for years, means mining companies can't raise money on Wall Street. Banks won't lend to them because they look at the artificially low price and say it's not profitable. This forces miners to look for capital elsewhere. Enter China. Chinese banks offer cheap loans in exchange for ownership stakes and offtake agreements. The manipulation of the COMEX paper price by Western banks has driven miners straight into Beijing's arms. It's a self-inflicted wound. And there's another layer to this. Environmental, social, and governance mandates, ESG, are being weaponized. Western pension funds and investment firms are told not to invest in mining because it's dirty and doesn't meet their ESG scores. This dries up Western capital for mining projects. But China doesn't care about ESG scores. They care about securing physical assets. While Western funds divest from mining to look virtuous, Chinese funds swoop in and buy those same assets at a discount. We are sacrificing our strategic security on the altar of political correctness, and our adversaries are laughing all the way to the vault. Silicon Valley should be absolutely terrified right now. The entire artificial intelligence revolution runs on hardware that needs silver contacts and components. If China controls the silver, they can throttle the growth of the US tech sector. They can make chips more expensive for American companies while keeping them cheap for Huawei and other Chinese tech firms. This is technological strangulation. We're building a digital economy on a physical foundation that we no longer own. The cloud might be virtual, but the servers are made of metal, and China owns that metal. As China continues to corner the silver market, the price of silver-based goods will continue to rise. Solar panels will get more expensive. Electronics will cost more. This feeds directly into inflation numbers. The Federal Reserve will try to fight this inflation with interest rate hikes, but you cannot fix a supply shock with interest rates. Higher rates won't magically create more silver. They'll only make it harder for mining companies to borrow money, which will reduce future supply even further. We're entering a cycle of resource-driven inflation that central banks are powerless to stop. China is also using this resource dominance to internationalize the yuan. They're telling countries around the world, if you want our silver or our refined metals, you need to pay us in yuan, not dollars. This creates artificial demand for Chinese currency and weakens the dollar's global position. The petrodollar system, where oil is traded in dollars, was the foundation of American financial power for 50 years. Now we're watching the birth of what some analysts are calling the silver yuan system. They're building a commodity-backed currency bloc that rivals the traditional Western financial system. There's also something suspicious about China's official reserve numbers. They report holding a modest amount of silver in official reserves, but satellite imagery of warehouse construction and import data that doesn't match export data suggests they're holding massive shadow stockpiles. They're hiding their true strength. When they finally reveal these reserves, it could be a checkmate moment for the global financial system. They'll prove they have the physical backing to support a commodity-based currency, while the West has nothing but debt and promises. Why do Western politicians allow this to happen? Follow the money. Many politicians and former officials sit on boards of Chinese-linked companies. Their family members get lucrative contracts. They lobby for open trade and investment. They're selling out their country's future for personal financial gain. This corruption at the highest levels is why regulatory agencies look the other way while our strategic assets are stripped and sold. The enemy isn't just at the gates. The enemy is inside the gates. We're starting to hear whispers of panic from procurement officers in Detroit and Silicon Valley. They're quietly trying to lock in 5-year supply contracts for silver. But guess what? There are no sellers willing to commit. The miners are already sold out to China through long-term offtake agreements. This will soon force U.S. companies to lobby the government for emergency intervention. We might see the Defense Production Act invoked to force domestic mines to prioritize American buyers, but it might be too little, too late. If the crisis gets severe enough, the U.S. government might even nationalize the remaining silver mines in Nevada and Idaho. Now, before you think, that sounds good, understand what it means for investors. The government would pay a fixed, artificially low price for the silver, effectively confiscating the profit potential. This nationalization risk is exactly why owning physical silver in your own possession is safer than owning mining stocks. Stocks can be seized or regulated. Physical metal buried in your backyard cannot. Organizations like the Silver Institute continue to publish reports saying the market is balanced and there's no shortage. But these reports rely on data provided by the very banks that have been accused of manipulating the market for years. They ignore shadow inventory, private offtake agreements, and unreported stockpiles. Their reports are designed to keep investors calm while the ship sinks. Do not trust official bodies that have conflicts of interest. Trust the price action. Trust the flow of physical metal. This physical takeover by China is the catalyst that will eventually break the paper silver market. You cannot deliver a paper contract to a factory in Shenzhen. They need actual metal. As China demands physical delivery and removes supply from the market, the COMEX exchange will eventually be forced to admit it doesn't have the metal to back all those paper contracts. When that happens, the paper price and the physical price will disconnect, and the true value of silver will be discovered in Shanghai, not New York. We are witnessing the largest transfer of economic power from west to east in 500 years. The West is consuming debt and services. The East is accumulating hard assets and production capacity. This trend is irreversible without either a major geopolitical conflict or total reset of the monetary system. The standard of living in the West will decline as we lose access to cheap commodities. If silver becomes effectively unobtainable at reasonable prices, the entire solar energy industry collapses, or they have to invent a substitute. But there is no substitute for silver in terms of electrical conductivity and thermal efficiency. Physics doesn't care about politics. Silver is the most conductive element on the periodic table. You can't legislate around that fact. This means the cost of energy will rise. The entire net zero carbon plan is built on a foundation of abundant, cheap silver, and we don't control that silver anymore. The green dream is turning into a resource nightmare. So what can you do? You cannot stop China's strategy. You cannot stop the manipulation on COMEX. But you can protect yourself. By holding physical silver, you're front-running the Chinese state. You're buying the same asset that the world's rising superpower is hoarding. When nations panic buy a resource, that tells you something about its future value. This is not financial advice. I'm not telling you what to do. But I am showing you what the smart money and the sovereign money is doing, and they're buying silver. This crisis also exposes the fragility of the just-in-time global economy that we've built. We sacrificed resilience for efficiency. We shut down domestic production to save a few pennies per unit. Now we have neither efficiency nor resilience. A supply chain that depends on peace, open trade, and friendly relations cannot survive in a world of resource nationalism and strategic competition. We're moving from a just-in-time world to a just-in-case world, where hoarding and redundancy are rational strategies for survival. The mines are being bought. The supply is being locked up. The export controls are in effect. The price is rising. This is not a drill. The era of cheap silver is over because the era of American resource dominance is over. We're entering a multipolar world where resources are weapons of economic warfare, and China just bought the armory. They bought the mines. They built the refineries. They control the logistics. They wrote the regulations. And they're not selling it back to us at the prices we're used to. The United States woke up too late. The silver market has been quietly cornered by a patient, strategic adversary that thinks in decades while we think in election cycles. The only silver you can truly trust is the silver you physically hold in your possession. Everything else is a promise, and promises can be broken. The global chessboard has been reset, and the East is starting this game with a queen, 2 rooks, and control of the center of the board. The West is playing with pawns and hoping for a miracle. I can't tell you what to do with your money, but I can tell you what the geopolitical reality is. And the reality is that the world's most important industrial metal is now controlled by a country that views the United States as its primary strategic competitor. Position yourself accordingly. If this information was valuable to you, you need to stay informed because this story is far from over. Things are moving faster than most people realize. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, because what happens in the next 90 days will determine the shape of the global economy for the next decade. And you don't want to be the last one to figure it out.